survey with the multicultural communities, the issues that come up are social isolation, financial hardship, and unemployment. In those series of circumstances, obviously, sections of the multicultural communities need support, need to help. So they would obviously reach out to their normal networks.
One of the local government areas, Hume, is already feeling the impact of the message to stay away. Local councillor Anne Potter told a council meeting last night that travellers are cancelling accommodation.
I've had phone calls from some of the accommodation up there saying, sorry, now because your address is in Hume, you're a hotspot, they're now cancelling their accommodation.
The Victorian government hasn't ruled out a stay-at-home order for the affected suburbs if health authorities can't get the outbreaks under control in the next couple of weeks.
The ABC's Isabel Rowe with that report. The head of the World Health Organization says it seems like every day a new and grim record is reached. Yesterday marked the highest number of daily cases, 183,000 people across the world presented with the virus in a 24-hour period. There are now 9 million cases globally, and there have been 1 million new cases in just 8 days.
Some countries are continuing to see a rapid increase in cases and deaths. Some countries that have successfully suppressed transmission are now seeing an upswing in cases as they reopen their societies and economies. All countries are facing a delicate balance between protecting their people while minimizing the social and economic damage. It's not a choice between lives and livelihoods. Countries can do both.
Of course, the country with the most infections is the United States, with 2.2 million, and 120,000 people have lost their lives. The infection rate in New York is falling, and restaurants have been allowed to open for outdoor dining. Hairdressers and in-store retail is now also allowed. But the news isn't so good in the south and west of the US. Florida and Arizona recorded their highest increase in infections over the weekend. And while infections fell in the US in May, they are now rising again in June. For more on this, here's the BBC's Anthony Zerker.
It seems to be surging in states that have been easing off their shelter-in-place restrictions and allowing businesses to reopen. So places like Texas and Florida and California and Arizona. I mean, it is interesting that these are a lot of southern states, but then again, those were states that weren't hit the hardest early on. New York obviously has seen their cases decline, but that's because they had a high number of cases initially. So I think what you're seeing is people are beginning to stop wearing masks, beginning to start socializing again, beginning to go out to businesses again, and as a result, the virus cases are starting to go back up again. California is one of the cases, one of the states that has seen a rise in cases. California is an entirely Democratic-controlled state. Meanwhile, Arizona, Texas, Florida, they're controlled by Republicans. So, it's much more of a relationship between the decisions to ease off on these business closure and shelter-in-place orders rather than the politics of the individual states in question.
Anthony Zerker there. Staying in the US, and the FBI and Justice Department are investigating the discovery of a noose in the garage of the racing driver Bubba Wallace. Mr. Wallace, who is the only black driver on the NASCAR circuit, says he's incredibly saddened at what he called a despicable act of racism and hatred. He's been vocal in his support for the Black Lives Matter movement and was instrumental in getting the Confederate flag banned from NASCAR races. In a show of solidarity, his fellow drivers pushed his car to the front of the field before a race this morning. Indian and Chinese military commanders have met to try to ease tensions at their disputed Himalayan border. India says 20 of its soldiers were killed in a clash last week with Chinese troops in a major escalation of a weeks-long standoff between the two countries in the western Himalayas. The meeting is said to have lasted for several hours, with the Indian side pushing for China to pull its troops back. China has asked India to stop all construction work in what it says is Chinese territory. Now, a peace deal signed between the United States and the Taliban at the end of February was supposed to move Afghanistan into a new phase, but the government in Kabul says the past week has been the deadliest for 19 years. Casualty figures are difficult to verify and are often disputed, but Afghan officials believe 291 members of the security forces were killed in more than 400 attacks in the last week. The BBC's Secunda Kamani has more.
The agreement that was signed between the United States and the Taliban in February, that set out basically a provisional timetable for the withdrawal of foreign forces from the country. The next stage of that peace process really is meant to be the Taliban and the Afghan government getting together for the first time to have direct negotiations. That's something that hasn't happened so far. Previously, it was just the United States and the Taliban talking. And I think a crucial thing to understand here about the Taliban's reluctance to lay down their weapons is that they believe that continuing fighting gives them the best form of leverage in these negotiations.
Secunda Kamani reporting there. A heatwave in one of the coldest places on Earth has led to a temperature of 38 degrees Celsius in Verkhoyansk in Siberia. That's 18 degrees higher than usual. If verified, it will be the hottest temperature ever recorded in the Arctic region and is another sign that the region is warming and fast. Ice in Siberia's rivers broke up early this year, and satellite footage today has recorded multiple wildfires. Now, for most people planning to get married this year, the coronavirus has meant having to cancel or postpone the big day, as large gatherings have been banned and many venues remain closed. But a very old law in Montana in the United States has allowed couples to get married, although in a very unusual way. The BBC's Gareth Barlow explains.
Amidst the big skies of the US state of Montana, weddings are taking place, but they aren't your typical ceremonies. Despite getting married, neither the bride nor groom are present. Montana is the only US state to allow double proxy weddings, where two people, known as proxies, stand in for the happy couple, saying the vows and signing the register on their behalf. Tom Kennedy runs a business arranging double proxy marriages.
The paperwork and the legal work is done online. It goes through an attorney. We supply the marriage license from the court. We have myself as minister and then two proxies stand in. We do a very, very quick ceremony. It's probably 3 minutes. We sign their documents on their behalf, put it back to the court, get the marriage certificate. They're done.
Montana's law allows anyone from the state and anyone serving in the US Armed Forces to have a double proxy wedding, and it's people in the military who typically use the service. With US troops confined to their bases because of the pandemic, requests by military couples have risen. Tom's company normally officiates around 40 marriages a month, but since lockdown restrictions were imposed to contain the coronavirus, the number of ceremonies has soared to around 200 a month. For a few $100s, couples can get married and obtain all the benefits that matrimony has to offer. For couples with a husband or wife serving in the military, it means their spouse can benefit from insurance and housing allowances and be deployed with their partner, privileges that unmarried couples don't enjoy. 19-year-old Savannah Phillips has just got married by proxy to her husband Luke, who serves with the US Air Force.
We plan to have a regular wedding, plan it out and have all our family and friends there. And then with coronavirus, we have been separated for so long. We just didn't know when the coronavirus would be over. And so we started exploring our other options. We just figured that was a great option for us so we could go ahead and get married.
Nestled in the northwest of the US next to the border with Canada, Montana isn't a state that often makes the headlines. But with the coronavirus changing lives and changing the way we live, the place often called the Treasure State is allowing people to marry their treasured sweethearts regardless of the pandemic.
Gareth Barlow with that report, and that's World Watch for today. Back to you, Marnie.
Thanks, Annabelle, and that's Midday Report Te Purongo o Te Pautūtanga for today, Tuesday, June the 23rd. Stay with us. RNZ will bring you the latest COVID-19 briefing with Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield shortly after 1. It will also be streamed live on our website rnz.co.nz. And just a reminder, we get lots of questions about the Māori name of our show, Te Purongo o Te Pautūtanga, Purongo being show, Pautūtanga being midday. We'll be back tomorrow with interviews and the latest news from Aotearoa and the world, but for now, from the midday team, kia pai tō rā and hei a popo. And Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan is next. Ngā mihi.
RNZ News at 1. Ngā mihi, I'm Shelley Venning. An infectious diseases expert in America says the shift of the coronavirus pandemic to younger people means it will spread faster. Several states, many of which were among the first to reopen following lockdowns, have reported that younger people are increasingly testing positive. The director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, Ashish Jha, says the news is concerning as younger people move about more.
The more the virus spreads, those younger people have parents, they have grandparents, and they're going to go spend time with people and get them infected. While we may see, kind of lower mortality rates, and obviously I hope we do, the more the virus spreads, the more everybody is vulnerable. We've really got to find a way to curtail the virus spread and not take comfort in the fact that the initial cases are primarily in young people.
New cases are surging across America, and the Trump administration is preparing for a second wave in the autumn. The co-founder of the Ihu Mātau occupation group says they're unlikely to accept a deal that includes building houses on the whenua. It's understood that a raupu whakahaere of both central, local government and mana whenua representatives will be established to make any decisions about the land expected to be acquired under the Housing Act. Sole co-founder Kiani Matatasipu says members have not signed off on a resolution yet. However, she says if the government's proposed resolution does require houses to be built, they will likely turn it down. She says her whānau have always maintained they don't want development of any kind on the whenua. A radiation technologist has been censured for sexually harassing a young female hospital cleaner. Reginald Victor Adolf faced multiple accusations, including of trying to kiss the worker on the forehead and physically stopping her from leaving the room. He's been charged for behaving in a sexually inappropriate manner. As well as censuring Mr. Adolf, the health practitioner's disciplinary tribunal fined him $5,000. Forest and Bird has applied for a judicial review over the government's tar control plan. It is seeking a declaration from the High Court that an operational plan to control the goat-like animals is illegal and is failing to meet requirements. It says too many fragile alpine environments continue to be decimated by tar, including Aoraki, Mount Cook and Westland Taiputini National Parks. Forest and Bird's regional manager, Nikki Snoijink, says the population is out of control.
Leaving bull tar in the national park, which is what their operational plan sought to do, is contrary to the National Parks Act and the Himalayan Tar Control Plan itself.
Nikki Snoijink says the tar control plan sets the total allowed population in the central South Island mountains to 10,000, but instead it is around 35,000. WorkSafe is now investigating a tractor crash that killed a man and injured another on a Southland farm. Emergency services were called to the property at Glenham, about 50 kilometres east of Invercargill, yesterday morning. One person died at the scene while the other was taken to Southland Hospital with moderate injuries. WorkSafe confirmed this morning it is investigating the matter. WorkSafe understands the tractor rolled, but it won't comment further while the matter is under investigation. One of Hollywood's best-known directors of the 1980s and 90s, Joel Schumacher, has died at the age of 80. He began as a costume designer and went on to direct films such as the hit St. Elmo's Fire. Joel Schumacher then took over the Batman franchise, making Batman Forever starring Val Kilmer, and then Batman and Robin in the 1990s. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Patrick Phelps digs up another mining story west of the Southern Alps. Who've got a window on the world of 5G technology, while Trevor Reekie speaks to WOMAD 2020 sensations Flor Di Talawachi.
Your love was never more than an illusion. I thought belonged to me.
That's Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're listening to RNZ National, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland scattered showers, periods of rain tomorrow, heavy from afternoon and possibly thundery. Auckland a few showers mainly north of the city, rain setting in everywhere from tomorrow afternoon. Coromandel Peninsula, isolated showers today, occasional rain tomorrow. Bay of Plenty mainly fine with isolated showers west of Te Puke. Becoming cloudy tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Kapiti coasts, including the central high country. Fine apart from a few areas of morning cloud or fog. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Coastal Marlborough and Canterbury Plains from Ashburton to...
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to this afternoon's update. I'm sorry about the small room. We're sort of back where we started here a few months ago. Now, There are 2 new cases of COVID-19 to report from managed isolation facilities in New Zealand today. First case is a man in his 20s who arrived in New Zealand on 19 June. He flew in from India on Air India flight 1316. He has been staying in managed isolation at the Pullman Hotel and now, as is our protocol, being moved to the quarantine facility, which is the Jet Park Hotel. The second case is a man also in his 20s who arrived in New Zealand on the 18th of June from the US of A. He was on flight NZ5 from Los Angeles. The man tested positive at the Jet Park Hotel after showing respiratory symptoms. Now, he had been at the Jet Park Hotel from his arrival. I understand there was a mix-up at the airport and he got in the wrong group, so he ended up going to the Jet Park. So he's actually been at the Jet Park since arriving, became symptomatic and was tested as a result. So actually both of these cases were picked up at our now routine testing at around day 3. In the second case, as you'll note, the man was also symptomatic. I can also say that one of the cases who has been in isolation in the Wellington region, in the Hutt Valley, is now considered recovered, and recovered being at least 10 days since onset of symptoms, at least 48 hours asymptomatic, and a negative test. So the total number of active cases in New Zealand is 10. Our total number of confirmed cases now is 1,165. And we still have the one significant cluster open. This is the one in Auckland at St Margaret's, but obviously no cases as a result of that cluster for some weeks now. Yesterday there were 4,303 tests processed at our laboratories around the country, and our total completed to date is 348,822. Just some comments on our testing as part of our border measures. So since June the 9th, we have rolled out the testing in managed isolation facilities at around day 3 and around day 12 of people's stay. There's been some suggestions in recent days that we should be testing people on arrival at the border, possibly as a third test. What we do at the border when people arrive, everybody arrives, is a health screen, a series of careful questions that they respond to, and anyone symptomatic at that point goes straight to the Jet Park facility and is managed as a symptomatic person and tested as part of that management. Anyone who is not reporting symptoms goes to one of the other managed isolation facilities. The reason we don't test on arrival and we wait till day 3 of the managed isolation is because that is about day 5 of many people's journey from wherever they have come from into New Zealand. And we know that testing then is more likely to pick up infection than earlier testing when people may be incubating the virus but not test positive. So that's the reason for the testing around day 3 instead of at the border. And likewise, the testing at day 12 provides extra security. First of all, because the tests do have a false negative rate of somewhere around 20 to 30%, but also it's part of our departure planning for people to make sure they do have, we can confirm that they don't have the virus. Now, I've talked before about the fact that these people who get positive tests quite late in the illness, there have been studies done in both Singapore and South Korea of these people who get a positive test. So the virus is detectable, but it's very clear, seems very clear from those 2 studies that they're not actually infectious. The testing, though, if it is positive at day 12, means that people's visit is prolonged until we can be certain that they are recovered. Okay, a follow-up on the context that we have been, or the follow-up of people following the 2 cases last week that came in on Tuesday, that were identified on Tuesday. So there are 3 groups of people. First of all, the 55 who had left managed isolation on a compassionate exemption between the 9th and 16th of June, and they either went to self-isolate under very strict criteria in the community, or they were on day a leave to go and make visits, for example, to hospice or hospital. And as of yesterday, we had one person who hadn't been located. That person was located yesterday afternoon, and testing's been arranged there. The next group we followed up, of course, was anyone who had interaction through the Novotel. There were all the people who were there. They've all been tested. There were staff as well who were working there, and there were then people who had been at the hotel, the Novotel, between the 6th of June and the 13th of June when the two women from the UK travelled down to Wellington. Yesterday we had 11 people that were outstanding of that 190, and of those 5 have now been further contacted and referred for testing. 3 have a community worker visiting this morning, and there are 3 where we're still working to contact those people, and we're using our finding services to ensure that we can make contact with them. And in terms of the staff at the hotel, of the 11 that were outstanding yesterday, there's only 2 that remain outstanding, and the hotel is following up with those. They will be tested as well. Then the next group, which was our really trying to cast the net wide, is to follow up everyone who left managed isolation from other facilities between the 9th and 16th. So as of last night, we had identified there were 2,159 people in that category. I should say that does include the people who had exemptions and the people who were at the Novotel for some of that period. As you will recognise, the dates don't quite match. The Novotel was the 6th to the 13th. So that figure of 2159 is we've got from Healthline, because they're all the people who they were doing call-in checks to check on their welfare 3 times during their visit. Now those calls are in addition to the daily health checks by the nurses. That's more about welfare, planning for when they leave, making sure they've got accommodation and support. All those people, the ones that I haven't talked about already, have of course completed their 14 days isolation, which has been and remains the most important part of the border safety. They all received health screening on departure, and testing was offered. So work is ongoing to make contact with all of the people in this group. In terms of getting in contact with them, they get a text, they get a call. There are 4 follow-up calls, and if we don't get a hold of them, then we use our finding services, which includes customs and police, to get an address from their database, and then if necessary, like we did with the person yesterday, we'll send either a health provider around, one of our local health providers, and or we can use the police if necessary to locate them. Work is ongoing with that group, and just to reiterate, these are all people who have spent the 14 days in self-isolation, in managed isolation, and we are just following up as a final precaution with them all. All of those people will have received contact, or there will have been attempts to contact them. Sometimes the phone numbers are phone numbers offshore, so they're international cell phones, and the calls don't go through. But if anybody in that group hasn't yet been contacted, then I'm asking them, as I did yesterday, there's a dedicated number with a dedicated helpline team, 09 302 0408. And as you'll recall, prior to the 9th, when we started to introduce the double testing, everybody had completed 14 days and then gone out into the community, and that remains the mainstay of our efforts to prevent importation of cases into the country. And I guess I'd just like to, two more comments to finish. New Zealand is one of a very small number of countries that not only includes the 14 days mandatory isolation, managed isolation, but also the double testing before people are allowed to go out into the community. This is, first of all, consistent with international evidence about that 14-day period, and that once people have completed the 14 days, they pose a very low risk to the community. Even if they might still have virus detectable, it does not mean they're infectious. And often the comparison is made, for example, with the jurisdiction of Taiwan, which has got a very good process for people coming in. But I should say that is not a managed isolation process. That is people self-isolating at home with community follow-up, very good, strict follow-up. So we're, as I say, one of very few countries that do that. And finally, a question that has been outstanding for the last few updates, a homeless person who apparently spent some time in managed isolation in Auckland. As far as we can tell, this is cannot be verified and may well be an urban myth. I'm sorry to disappoint you there. But thank you very much. But if anyone has information on that person, I'd be very happy to take that as well. Please.
Those 2,159 people managed isolation. How many of them left without being tested?
I still can't tell you that number, and
Why not?
this is because the testing was done and no NHI was necessary on the information the hotel has got. So we're busy matching the testing in the laboratory database with the names and dates of birth of the people that we now have from that research.
It was a week ago, though. Isn't that pretty poor that you can't give us that?
Yeah, I wish I could, but what I can say is, of course, that they'd all completed the 14 days. We had started to introduce the testing. We do know that many of them were tested on departure. Many we have followed up because they were in the Novotel or had been on that compassionate exemption. And we are wanting to follow them all up and do that match across. And yes, I would like to be able to have that number with you, but the matching work is ongoing.
Did all of those 55?
What about the 55 who were granted compassionate leave? Were they tested before they were?
Some were tested before they went out, and some were not, but we have subsequently followed them up. Now,
So
just in that group, what I can say is yesterday I said there were 4 who hadn't been tested. That was 4 children. There are several others, 3 who weren't tested because of the circumstances, which were medical circumstances. Either they were going to get medical treatment, and then it would have been a clinical decision to do it, or in fact they were palliative and going home. And then there are several who, once they their circumstances changed, so they decided to actually leave the country, and so they weren't necessarily tested before they left again.
Do each of those 2,000 odd people, do they pose a risk? I know that you say that the 14 days is kind of the key thing here, but if they're allowed to mingle with other people who potentially have COVID because we didn't identify that through testing in those self-isolation facilities, do each of those 2,000 people pose a risk?
They pose a very, very low risk to the community because A, they've completed the 14 days, and B, they are in managed isolation. And I know there have been a lot of stories about so-called mixing and mingling, which sounds like it's a wedding reception or a cocktail party. That is not the circumstances in these facilities. And you also know that, just to be sure of that, Air Commodore Webb has done an audit of the facility, so we're continuing to strengthen that. And again, we have had cases come in before when all we had was the 14 days, the 35 cases diagnosed since the 9th of April, and we have not seen any cases go out into the community. The 14 days is actually very, very, it's got room at the end, over and above, when 99% of people, if they're going to be show the infection, will have done that by day 11 or 12. So there's already room built into that. Yes.
So the 7 of the...
Sorry, just one follow-up question.
Thank you. Can you explain why there was a period of 37 days before June the 9th when we didn't identify any cases with links to overseas? And I know you'll point to increased numbers and COVID hotspots, but is it also because you weren't testing enough? So
I don't think it was because we weren't testing enough, because you will recall through that period of in particular level 3 and into level 2, there was very wide testing happening around the country. And if there had been any infections leaving those managed isolation facilities, we would have picked them up there, but we did not pick them up. So we're confident that not only was the 14 days being the mainstay, but also that we didn't pick up any infection out in the community. So saying, we are now doing the double testing, and it may well be that in addition to the 35 infections that we did detect during that period because people became symptomatic, there may have been some people who were infected and asymptomatic, but the 14 days served its purpose, and that it will continue to.
We were celebrating zeros when there may have been cases that we weren't identifying.
We were celebrating zeros because we were very confident there was no infection out in our community, whether from people who had come through managed isolation or from people who had been infected through community transmission.
So you said that the 2,000 odd that left managed isolation since 9th of June were offered testing. Wasn't at least day 12 testing mandatory by that point? Why was it only an offer?
Yes, so it is mandatory now, and it's in the new order. And under the old order, there was interpretation.
The law passed was very clear on the statute books
about
mandatory testing.
Yes, well, the new order says that.
But the law that was passed by Parliament and the health response made it
Yep.
very clear that
So-
testing is mandatory and could be enforced.
So the testing at the border and all the quarantine arrangements sit under a health order that's under the Health Act that went into force on the 9th of April, which is from myself as Director General of Health and as National Medical Officer of Health. In there it does not mention, it's not specific about testing, it talks about low risk and high risk, and that was the point that I clarified last Tuesday, that people could not be categorised as low risk unless they had also returned a negative test in addition to completing the 14 days.
So these have been since, sorry, come back to my original question, these have been since June 9th. The people released, you said, were offered testing, but since June 9th it's been mandatory. Why does it offer and not enforced?
Look, this is the point I addressed last week, that actually there was clearly the implementation, there was just a breakdown in the communication there. That's what I clarified last week, and so everyone who has left since the 16th will have needed to return a negative test, and that's made clear in the new order, which came into effect yesterday, that that testing at around day 3 and around day 12 is a requirement of managed isolation.
Would you be confident that the breakdown of these people since the 16th then would have definitely been tested if it was a bit unclear up until then? I mean, is there any point at which you can say people are not offered tests, they're required to do that?
Yes, that was what I made clear. As soon as I found out about the 2 cases on the 16th, within a very short period of time, within the hour, a message went out to all the facilities, and I had checked with my chief legal advisor that I could, in my opinion, someone was not deemed to be low risk unless they had returned a negative test, as well as the health check. Some of them were not tested, that's right, and that's why, as an extra precaution, on top of the 14 days, we're doing the follow-up phone call, and if they hadn't been tested, well, we're asking them to be tested.
Do you have a sense of how many of them have not been tested?
Derek,
Do you have a sense of how many of them have not been tested?
I don't, I'm sorry. It's that the teams are working all the time and the numbers are changing all the time, but I would like to have that number, and that was asked of me, but it's about being able to match with the NHI number, the laboratory data, with non-NHI data that is collected at the facilities.
Do you know also, because 7 of those 55 weren't tested because they were children or because of medical reasons, do you know how many of those remaining 48 who were granted compassionate leave, how do you know how many of those were not tested?
When they departed the facility, before they departed, I don't. And again, the key point here is some of them it was day leave, and there were very strict requirements, PPE use and so on. And then they're back, so they're being tested. They were subsequently tested in the facility as part of the testing, and likewise, others who have gone out into the community have been followed up and tested.
Why is it so hard to find that information? Shouldn't that be quite easy to find?
Look, I wish it was easier, and this is one of the key challenges for the healthcare system, is being able to link up. We do have the NHI. Once we have the NHI, we can link data from a whole range of different sources, and that's a real asset to us. And in this case, the information collected in the hotels for managed isolation purposes didn't include the NHI. Of course, now that we've got the routine testing, we can collect that NHI as soon as that testing starts, as soon as people get that first test, and then we're able to match up the results.
So people will look at that and say, you've got 48 cases there. It's been a week. We've been asking how many of them. It was a prerequisite to be tested before being granted leave on compassionate grounds. And people just consider that time period and say, what's going on there?
Some of them indeed were tested. What I can say also is, and you'll have seen the expectations and requirements around people going on compassionate leave, there's a very strict set of obligations and criteria on them to ensure that the community is kept safe. They're going in, and the reason they're called compassionate grounds is because they're going to either spend time with a loved one or to grieve with their friends and family. And there are very tight expectations around that, which were designed to keep the community safe.
Can you say how to
Sorry, we'll just actually I was coming back here.
Yeah, when were health authorities made aware that a contact had visited the 2 women isolating in the Hutt area?
Yeah, so I've just spoken with the Medical Officer of Health about this. So there was, as I said last week, there was a number of people that came to the house to drop off food, and understand one of those all non-contactless, so all contactless, that one of them spent some time at some distance talking with the women. Now, this can happen, for example, at our managed isolation facilities. People are able to communicate through the fence with others. There's a distance separating people. And the medical officer of health talked about it with the person. There wasn't deemed to be any risk at all, but the person chose to or did self-isolate and was tested. I've just checked with the medical officer of health last Friday, and the test is negative. So,
just to be clear with this one, were there rules around dropping off and visiting people when they're on these special exemptions?
well, yes, there are, and except that these things have to be contactless, of course. So people are dropping food on the front door.
So this wasn't breaking the rules?
No, because there was separation. There was physical distancing there.
And so we've had reports from doctors working in GP clinics that there's been a bit of an upsurge in people requesting COVID testing. Do you think that the testing facilities around New Zealand and the spread of them are adequate right now?
I do think that they are adequate, and what we're talking about with the district health boards today is making sure that we can maintain 24/7 testing capacity, and also there was discussion this morning, Dr Jeff Lowe from GPNZ talked about the need to maintain the community-based assessment centres, because we may need to surge up capacity, and yes, you're right, off the back of the cases in the last week, there has been, I think, a high level of awareness, and people are going for testing, and you'll have seen that the rates of testing have gone up, the numbers of tests have gone up.
Coming back to Derek's question, why is that information not coming through? Are you getting, is there obstruction on that information about compassionate leave and testing on the ground from officials? What is the hold-up with this information a week later with a relatively limited number of cases?
Yep. So there's no obstruction. I can be really clear about that. I'm just really, I just want to be able to give you the right numbers, and that we've got a team that does NHI matching, so it can get name and date of birth information, and they're busy matching the results we're getting from the lab database with the people who were in the facilities, whether they were granted compassionate exemptions or they were in, amongst the rest of the balance.
Is it being done with urgency though? I mean, we had the National Party leader today, basically say that it's dragged on, it's too long, and people should know the status of these people who were given compassionate leave.
What is being done with urgency is following up the people, all of the people, starting with the ones who might have presented a slightly higher risk, that is the compassionate leave people, notwithstanding that they all, had very strict expectations and protocols around their release from managed isolation. Then the people who might have had some potential contact with the two women who were at the Novotel, and then we stepped out to that wider group. So that's the bit we're focusing on, is making sure we are contacting all those people, recalling that now we're down to people who have all done 14 days in managed self-isolation, but we are following up as an extra cautionary patient. It's a huge priority. Yeah. The compassionate leave ones, yes. The following them up, absolutely. The question is the making sure they have had a test, and if they're reporting when they're contacted that they hadn't had a test, then they've been referred for testing.
You mentioned in one of your earlier answers to Derek, I think, that some of those people who were granted compassionate leave were tested. So you know that some of them were. How many were?
I don't know the number, but I do know that some of them were tested. I've been told that.
So you've got a bit of an indication as to how many might have been tested and how many weren't. So why not share that?
I don't know the number. At the moment, I can say I know some were. But obviously some weren't as well. And part of that was because of the 55, 20, from what I can recall, and here's a number I do know, and I think I said it yesterday, 24 were going out into self-isolation. The balance were either in transit or stayed in the facility, then their circumstances changed, so they left to go back overseas, or they were just going out on day visits.
Can you say why haven't you released the Alan Clark review?
Now, I understood it had been, and I followed up with the team yesterday, and if it's not on the website, it will be soon, but definitely not holding that back. It's been a really helpful document, just as we've published all the other reviews done by Aisha Viral and others on the contact tracing.
With those testing numbers, though, can you see why it does go to the heart of public confidence when we don't know how widespread the problem is, and why weren't a group of Ministry of Health staff thrown at this? We know that you're exceptionally busy, but why not see this as a problem and let's just get it sorted?
Yeah, can I just confirm, they don't present a problem out in the community. We are now working through the balance of these people as an extra precaution. They all spent 14 days in managed isolation. I'm very keen to make sure we follow them all up, And I think the public is keen too, and that's why we're progressing that. We have thrown a lot of resource at this, and we'll continue to.
You told us that about the 2 women as well, and the 2 women did end up meeting people, and they did turn out to be COVID positive. So don't these 55 people represent 55 potential cases of COVID?
The 55 have all been followed, so they have all been followed up. That's the 55 exemptions I'm talking about. So we've worked through from the highest, potentially highest risk, although the risk was extremely low because of the protocols in place, then to the Novotel, then to the broader group. So the 55 have all been followed up.
So why then can't you tell us how many of those 55 have been tested and how many haven't?
I just don't have the number here with me.
Why not just ask them?
Yeah. So I haven't personally asked them, but we will. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
But you followed,
I think
to all of them.
again.
The ministry's spoken to all of them. Why not just ask them if they were tested or not?
Okay, let me just I'll come back to you on that. I just don't have that with me.
When
okay,
will we get these numbers?
Yep. Sorry.
Do you know when we'll get these numbers?
I am keen to get them as soon as possible, and I want to share them with you when I'm confident in the numbers.
So why do you think that they weren't, because you said all but 1 have been tested of those 55, is that correct?
Actually, all but 1 had been followed up yesterday. There had contact had been made by yesterday. And that person was found yesterday afternoon and taken for testing. The 7 that hadn't been tested that I know about, and I wanted to update you on that. Yesterday I said there were 4, that was the children, but there are 3 others who, because of the circumstances, didn't require a test for medical reasons.
If they've all been contacted, and if it is important to know, going back to what Tova asked, why not ask them when they're contacted whether they were tested before they left?
Yes. I agree.
I understand you're trying to, the health response is the most important and you need to follow up and test them, but that number is critical to understanding the depth of failure in the protocols that were meant to be followed.
Yeah, well, what was followed was the requirements around their self-isolation or their visiting protocols. So I will get you that number, and I'm sorry I haven't got it, as I've said, I would like to have it as well. There's a question over here.
Why wasn't the NHI number collected for that, 2-month period from April 9 until very recently? Was that an oversight?
I don't think it was an oversight. It was just the nature of the information collected, and there's good information on people because they've come through the border. So there is contact information and there is address information, noting that for some people actually they hadn't been in New Zealand for quite some time, so may not have had a permanent address, and may not have had an NHI number. But clearly that's something now we will be able to have the NHI number so we can match to other records immediately.
For the new case today that ended up accidentally in quarantine instead of managed isolation, how did that happen, and can you assure us that it hasn't happened the other way, where someone who's supposed to go to quarantine because they were symptomatic ended up in managed isolation?
Yeah, now I don't know exactly how it happened, I just got that information late morning, but sometimes the jet park facility is used for managed isolation if the other facilities are full anyway, but evidently I'm told all I have is that there was a mix-up at the airport around the queues. They ended up in the jet park, so that's where they would have been transferred upon diagnosis anyway.
Talking to people at the Jet Park Hotel, they say it was only when it kind of hit the news media, the fact that those 2 women being released without being tested, that there was suddenly this hustle to test. Is that what happened?
Look, I think there was testing being rolled out. That was started with the day 12 people so that we could get as many people as possible before they left managed isolation. Just bringing you back, this is in addition to the 14 days. Yes, it has absolutely sharpened our focus, and I said that last week, and that's why as soon as I found out on the 16th, I asked that no one leave managed isolation unless they've had the test, and the result is negative.
Because those 37 days when no cases were identified with links to overseas travel, there were about 7,700 people that arrived in that country, in the country over that time. So to not identify any cases until after the bungle last Tuesday, and then suddenly have nearly a dozen cases in New Zealand, that suggests that you weren't testing enough.
The mainstay, again, since the April the 9th, has been the 14 days managed isolation, which is international practice. We have added in the testing which we introduced from the 9th. We couldn't test everybody on the 9th, but that is now in place from the 16th. Everybody has around day 3 and around day 12. And I talked earlier in the week about the reasons why we are now seeing the cases. First of all, yes, we are testing. That doesn't mean there was a risk previously. But secondly, the pandemic is accelerating overseas, and we have got people coming back from countries like India and Pakistan, and we've seen the UK and today western seaboard of the US, where they do have a lot of this infection out there. And so hence I think it's it's helpful we're identifying the cases, because then we can make sure we're really keeping the border safe.
Likewise, some of those 7,700 were coming from COVID hotspots as well. So are you expecting people to believe that 7,700 people came into the country over 37 days and none of them had COVID-19?
Well, all the ones who developed symptoms, we did identify through testing, and we found 35. There may have been others who were asymptomatic, and that's why they had the 14 days managed isolation, and why we're confident they didn't present a risk to the community, because we did not detect any infection out in the community, and we're now up over 20,000 people who have been through our managed isolation facilities.
With the testing rates, you talked about 4,300 today. What's the minimum number we need to do each day to be able to give ourselves effective data to know it hasn't spread?
Well, we know it's not out in the community. However, we have been testing right through, even through alert level 2 and 1, when we were confident there wasn't any community transmission, and will continue to test people with symptoms out in the community. And we've seen an increase in people presenting for testing, partly because we are going into winter, so more people have respiratory symptoms, but also I think the awareness over the last week. Then we will be doing the testing of everybody twice in managed isolation facilities, and we are seeing the number of people in those facilities grow. And we will be doing surveillance testing of people working in those facilities and at the border. So there will be thousands of tests being done every day, and we can do up to 12,000 or just over 12,000 if necessary.
Is there a minimum, though, you've told your officials we have to get over 2,000 a day or over 3,000 a day?
No, I haven't set a minimum. I know we will get more than that because of the testing in the facilities. But what we want to do is, in a sense, the testing out in the community is like supercharged sentinel testing. In a regular flu season, we do around 270 swabs a week across the country in 90 practices. The first 3 people that come in the door with respiratory symptoms each week get a swab in those 90 practices to see how much influenza is out there and what type of influenza. We're now going to be doing thousands a day, which I would call, just really, really extensive sentinel testing in the community to make sure that if there is any virus out there, we are picking it up.
Do you have enough capacity and funding for all of this testing?
Yes.
Ever since last Tuesday, when you got the testing working in these facilities and you kicked it into higher gear, you've been finding cases. Was it a mistake not to be testing before the 16th, and before the 9th, so that, in response to questions like Tova's, you're not kind of guessing, but you would have actually know what the situation looked like?
I don't think it was a mistake, and I think the question's been asked for 2 reasons. First of all, the 14 days is the mainstay and remains the mainstay, as I've said. Secondly, remember that one of the reasons we brought it in was to, because we were moving to alert level 1 with much more travel of people around and interaction with people. So prior to that, under the previous alert levels, there were still constraints on numbers of people and events and so on. So that, coupled with the 14 days, I think provided, and we have evidence that provided us with a high level of assurance that there wasn't infections getting out into the community from managed isolation, because we weren't detecting any out there in the community.
And there was talk about a month and a half ago about a system of sewage surveillance. Has there been any news on that, or are you aware of any work with MOH on that?
ESR has developed the capacity to do this, and in fact they collected samples through the period when we had known infection in the community through March and April, and have been able to detect the virus in sewage samples. So they now have the technology to be able to use that as part of our ongoing surveillance, and that is part of our surveillance plan from here.
Will they be able to tell us if...
I don't know if it's being used right now, but we'll come back to you on just where they are at, what the intentions are with the next stages in that.
Will they be able to tell us if COVID-19 was in the country earlier than that first identified case? Will we do kind of...
Yes, it could. It could, of course, where this has been used elsewhere, there are much higher rates of infection, but what they have shown is they were able to detect the virus when we had those, even then, still low rates of infection in the community. And then there will be ongoing testing as part of our surveillance to just see if there is any in wastewater. So that will be part of the overall surveillance.
Do you think that there's a kind of weak link in our protocols in terms of the lack of enforced self-isolation for flight attendants coming back into the country?
Yeah, that's something we're looking at very tightly. The area we were most concerned about was the western seaboard of the USA, just because of the arrangements there. So we've worked with Air New Zealand to introduce that all those aircrew have to stand down for 48 hours and be tested and return a negative test. We've been talking actively with them over the last 48 hours around Australia, because what's clear is that people are coming from high-risk areas converging in Australia in transit and then coming across, and we've had several cases now on those flights. The protocols used on those flights by the staff are the same as on any international flight. So I'm confident about that, but we're looking at what else we may need to add, and active discussion, and expecting to confirm some further arrangements with them. One which is already getting underway is the provision of masks to all passengers on those flights.
And that could look like an enforced managed self-isolation period of 14 days for returning crews?
No, I don't think it will look like that, but it could look like, and one of the measures could be to make sure that those crew are solely on international routes, not also flying domestic routes, because they're the same A320s are used. It could look like similar to what we're doing with the LA staff, but we'll work with them on that. The main thing here is we're trying to reduce the risk to the crew and, of course, to the wider community.
Are you looking to bring those masks, sorry to clarify, passengers on flights, those masks, are you looking to make that mandatory?
What we're looking to do is, and the advice is that that's strongly recommended, and so I talked to the CEO of Air New Zealand on Friday. The Minister's been talking to Air New Zealand again today, and the intention is that the masks will be handed out to all passengers once they're on the flight, and they'll be shown how to wear them. So there may be the odd person who can't wear one for a medical reason, but I think people will understand that that's part of the protocol. And
do you consider our isolation, the strict isolation, is that it's strict enough? There's, like in Australia, for example, if you're in isolation 14 days, you're only allowed 15 minutes outside of your room every week. Should ours be tighter?
Well, we're looking at that. It appears to have served us well to date, but of course we're looking at whether we might strengthen it. For example, at least for that first period until people have returned that initial test as negative, but we're looking at all these things. We're really, really focused on making sure it's working as it should. Perhaps the last couple of questions.
Currently they're allowed to leave every day for some fresh air, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes. They can go outside and into the area outside the facility and do some exercise, but not out onto the streets.
Can I just rephrase an earlier question? You say you're trying to find that number on the compassionate grounds who haven't been tested, and you want to know that.
Yeah.
Do you find the fact that you haven't been told or you don't know, do you think that is acceptable?
Look.
And if not, then what needs to change? Should it just be like a simple database?
Yeah, I agree, and in fact that's what I've got people working on at the moment on, including with the all-of-government team. So we've got a single database that covers end-to-end, including the health aspects of that managed isolation process, as well as the non-health aspects. Yes, I think we need to get that in place, and I know there's a team working on that. I would really like to have that data and to be able to provide you with the same certainty every day as right from the start I've been able to provide the case numbers and the cluster numbers and all those sorts of things. So we're wanting to nail that very quickly.
Did your team not ask those people when they
I can't say, I'm sorry, but I will find that out.
But shouldn't you already have the
Hi, is the Ministry of Health advising Air New Zealand on any, I guess, lifestyle options for flight attendants that come back? Like, are you advising them maybe not to go clubbing the weekend after they return from an international flight?
Not at the moment, but all these things are obviously in discussion. The key thing is, and this has again served us well right from the start of the outbreak, you'll remember early on, in fact the protocols being used by flight staff now are the same as the ones we agreed and developed and agreed for that very first evacuation flight out of Wuhan. So the same use of masks and or gloves and or hand sanitizer and infection prevention control cleaning procedures are now the same on any international flight as they were with that original Wuhan flight.
So as it stands right now, I could, if I was a flight attendant, I could fly from the US back to go on like pick up someone from Australia who'd been in the US, fly back to New Zealand on Friday, and then go out clubbing with my friends on Saturday?
Yes, potentially. However, again, with the caveat that there are very clear protocols in place, because of course Air New Zealand want to protect their crew as well, and so those protocols, which have been in place since that February evacuation flight, are the ones that are still being used now.
Has there been any thought towards using these rapid point-of-care tests either on that day one at the border or in other scenarios?
Yes, definitely watching that. And I just read last week a study done in Australia about the point-of-care testing, and also there's the serology testing as well. Just still not reliable enough, and whilst it could play a part in the overall sort of checking people, both at exit and entry, but we don't think it's reliable enough now. I should say the other thing we are doing is looking at the protocols and processes in place where people are boarding flights at different ports to make sure we've got a high level of confidence that there's appropriate symptom checking and or temperature checking before people get on flights to
Dr.
New Zealand.
As Director General, do you think it's good enough that you don't have, that you should have these figures to hand, the testing figures, that you don't have them? Is it your officials let you down?
No, they haven't let me down. As I said, I would like to have those numbers. What I can say, and what we're absolutely focused on, and that's why I'm here today, is we have worked systematically through where there may have been any risk and spread the net very wide to make sure we contact, first of all, the managed isolation exemptions, compassionate exemptions, then anyone who was in the facility or associated with it, that's the Novotel, and then we've gone even wider just to be sure. But this is an extra precautionary measure, remembering that the latter group, everyone had done the 14 days managed isolation. I'm as keen as anybody to ensure that New Zealanders are kept safe and that they feel safe, and part of that will be ensuring that we can assure them about the numbers, so we will get them as soon as possible.
Do you accept that it undermines confidence in yourself and the ministry that you don't
Look, I think what would undermine confidence is if I wasn't fronting, if I wasn't saying I'm responsible for sorting it out, and that we weren't following up these people and doing everything we can to make sure New Zealanders are kept safe. That's clearly what we are doing, and I'll stand by that. Thank you.
Thank you.